Hey Internet, so today I'm doing something a little different. This is a project I was working on years and years ago, and I set it aside for uni and then smaller projects, but when I went back to it recently, I realised that it feels even more relevant now than it did when I was writing it. And it used to predict the far, far future, but now kind of just predicts the close future. I really like where it's going, but I'd say it'd take like a year to finish it, so I'm not sure if it's something I should do. It's a huge undertaking, but it could be something really good. That's why I'm reaching out to you guys, so I'm hoping you'll tell me if it's any good and if I should finish it. And even if nobody listens, at least I'll have some evidence of my foresight. And if sci-fi isn't your thing, maybe you could check out one of my other videos, like my fantasy full short story, Impending Doom. Or if you want paper, you don't want to use your ears, all my paperbacks and ebooks and audiobooks can be found in the links below. There's fantasy, poetry, and even a children's book, so there's something for everyone. Anyway, enough rambling from me. Let's dive in. I hope you enjoy. Oh yeah, and please subscribe. Oh, and I thought it would be fun to use this visual avatar robot. So yeah, robots. Alexis by Wix Solis. Randall awoke abruptly, unpleasantly. The cause was a cold barrel of a weapon pressed against his forehead and something cold being fastened around his neck. His eyes widened as they opened to meet a face he did not know, and the stranger wore a smile. The unnaturalness of his snake eyes certainly scared him as he assumed they were intended. He could see the rest of the modifications were cheap, however. His eyes were the only genetic splice, the rest cybernetic enhancements that looked unmaintained and dated. The largest and most blusterous element was a scratched metallic frame of odd colour covering the intruder head to toe, and for a moment he wondered when the last time it was this man used his own muscles, something he took pride in. As his mind raced with these thoughts, the heart quickly caught up, increasing in pace by the second. Continuing, his mind lurched to the family, a burning worry taking the place of his questioning disbelief. My home defence is outmanoeuvred. How? He had rhetorically started to ask himself. As if by fate's sick twist, a synchronicity of mind and matter, this coincided with another man entering the bedroom. His face wore no smile, but instead of shame, and it was apparent why. With him, huddled together and shaking, was a beautiful woman and 2 children. Paralysed by fear but coaxed by his hand, they each struggled with large overbearing metallic collars of their own. No, please, don't hurt them. Anything, I'll give you anything, expelled Randall, bursting the silence with a loud pop, even though he seemed to whimper. His vision focused on his wife, narrowing until all he felt was the pound of his heart and her face all he saw, her usually warm grey eyes glazed with panic. The movement of the man closer to him demanded his attention, though. His eyes were not panicked, he was in control, and his resolve felt a cold conviction. A calmness that must have been born by repetition. He was a criminal through and through. Randall's mind still raced with things he could say or offer. Everyone has a price. He obviously wants something, though he knew it was best for him to stay reticent, and everyone in the room agreed. The 2 men studied each other's faces whilst the group watched by the door. One sat looking up but breathing heavily, the other looking down, somehow seeming not to breathe at all. Holding the gaze instead of aiming, Snake Eyes raised his arm behind him. Randall saw the gun in his hand. His hand moved, started alternating, pointing the weapon at each of the cowering family's heads. The other man, the guard, seemed to have his eyes shut, but Randall dare not break eye contact with the snake to truly know. As the threatening twitching of his arm increased in speed, he finally spoke. You know what I want you to do, and I'm about to give you a chance to do it. Due to the obvious risks, I gotta trust you, and I'll only trust your fear. As the intruder finished, he fired the gun, the bullet hitting the older child between the eyes. The room erupted, mainly with the screaming of the woman, a blood-curdling pitch, the sound of pain. Crawling with disregard, she cradled the fallen child. The younger, living sister cried, and even the intruder's partner jumped back with an exhalation of shock. He didn't pull the family apart but looked over to the boss of the room, but he was still busy with his prey. Randall's bellow carried a denial. His disbelief held in the note. Snake Eyes merely pressed a button on his sleeve, the metal collars beeping, then stealing everyone's voices and plunging the room back into silence. Ears ringing from the sudden change, his hand shot up to hold his temples, to express his pain and desire to reject what had happened. He hadn't cradled his head for a second before a third intruder fell from the ceiling, above but slightly behind. He didn't even see him. Barely heard a sound. With acrobatic perfection, both hands were swiped from his temple to his lower back, all whilst the man landed. Randall was forced to look at the tatters of his family without diminution. His wife pulling both their children deep into her chest whilst being sick, all too without barely a sound.
"Okay, you got 1 minute to get this done, or those two are going to learn to think little Timmy was the lucky one,"
the intruder whispered in Randall's ear. Giving delay to let it sink in, his hands were then released simultaneously as Snake Eyes stepped backwards. Shell-shocked and in a trance, he stood up and left the room. Whilst approaching the exit, he turned to tell his wife it was going to be okay, that they'll do the replace and wipe, even a wipe for her if she wanted. However, he was forgetting the collar, so instead he passed her, his mouthing unnoticed as her head hung down. Not being able to comfort her was perhaps the worst pain of all. He left the room with the newest intruder of the three, who he could see now wore a black bodysuit, his shadow.
"You took that too far and I think you enjoyed it,"
the family's guard condemned. Snake Eyes snapped back in a ruffled whine.
"Judging and moralizing does not get this done. I'm getting shit done. Now shut up. We can talk in a minute." Boom!
Snake Eyes said, all through a carefree grin. He then pressed another button on his sleeve and all the intruders vanished entirely and instantly from sight. Seeing this whilst entering the room, Randall gasped.
"Bioteleportation? But how?"
he thought. It didn't matter. He rushed to his family. But something was wrong. His wife was still looking at the ground but no longer sobbing, instead frozen in place artificially, as was the children, no longer filled with the motion of life. He shook her body desperate for response and began to weep in confusion. Then the realization hit him. His right hand slowly raised to his right temple, fingers trembling. They found his interface node. Surely not. His thoughts stung. He clicked it. The all too familiar blue light washed everything away, the outlines of his room and family present for a flash, before the pulsating glow had removed all, a flicker of black as he waited for his vision to be replaced by the real world.
"Ah, there you are, and I thought I was going to have to shout at you for making us late. Everyone's ready but you,"
his wife jostled, the warmth of her eyes sweetly accompanying the eagerness in her tone. She was totally unaware of her husband's trauma, willfully ignorant to his cold sweat and vacant expression. She knew the V-delirium was common to him. His heart lurched forwards in relief but backward in further realization. He was going to vomit. He may be able to fool his partner but nobody else. He had to ring the president straight away, and fuck knows how he was going to tell him. Chapter 1. Don't forget your face. It is human nature to recognize the passage of time through change. Motion, transition, and transformation all rudiments to the glue holding up the curtains. Regardless of our views, it allows our pantomimes to continue. But we must remember, time is relative, a reflection of interactions in space. People see things from different angles as time changes them. Truth can become lies, and what was the world to someone can become meaningless. Gabriel Volve was a man about to go through many changes, in situation and self. He had awoken with restrained anticipation, knowing the day's upcoming events would force him to take on the tasks he had for far too long put off. He peeled himself out of bed, forcing his eyes to stay open as he trudged from the room. As his wife showered, he paced the house, marvelling at all the new furniture and decoration she had printed in the single hour he had lost in bed. Her get up and go will always impress him, even if it often fed a gallop towards pursuits he saw little worth in. Not that the frivolous is foolish, but it didn't seem quite real enough for him, and certainly not all that fun. His trudge continued towards the kitchen, in search of water, where he saw the taps too played their part in the medieval theme. Wooden spouts on the side of an aged barrel, the walls projecting old rock as to not ruin the facade. He had told her often since she started wearing her perma lenses she need not make non-digital alterations. It takes her more time and he really didn't mind, but he knew she would continue. His wife's hunger for his involvement was too a projection of sorts, one that he tried to cherish as it could be satiated in far worse ways, but he struggled. Regardless, the technological prestige of the house never truly became normal to him. Being from the outside, raised as he was, what was normal to all else blew his mind. In her defense, it never took her long. The woman could in the space of a bath have changed the whole house. He often thought the way she flicked and moved around, increasing the size of the holograms he couldn't see, and lacing them where she wanted them printed in the room often looked like a dance from his perspective. Then he would know when she was done as the vast overlapping layers of wires, metal plates, nozzles and levers that made up the ceiling would start to dance with her, intricate parts performing pattern dances of their own. Hundreds of moving systems coming together to breathe life into her invisible dream. The ceiling slept at the moment and he didn't mind. He thought it was beautiful even motionless, and enjoyed the serenity that came from everything being still. Whilst looking upon a sword on the wall and thinking how everyone he knows doesn't cut their own food, and that comparison to those who lived by this relic, the relentless mental train of his pondering was halted by the entrance of his wife.
"Honey, my discharges are all of a better colour. I couldn't be more ready,"
she said, smiling a full grin. Gabriel let out a quick unguarded chuckle, more a huff of air. She dropped her full grin into a half one, replying,
"What is it with your obsession with poop? Expulsion to bodily function?"
Gabriel couldn't shake the reflex of his old schemers. Even though one of his first epiphanies when he left the harsher life of the outside world for the city was how much sense analysing excretions daily with a computerised toilet for medical reasons made. Much more sense than the taboos of his family's wooden shack. Even though it made him jump the first time he took a piss and the toilet told him he needed zinc, manganese and a host of other things. It still made him laugh. He spoke his reply. "You know my thoughts on it. It's just funny matched with that smile."
"Whatever, caveman,"
she replied, playful as usual. "I take it you're not eating real food with me today," Gabriel proclaimed, continuing the joke.
"You know I have to meet with Julie. You'll have to sit and enjoy this old castle. Have Alexis make you something enticing. A hog, perhaps."
After saying this, Lengiana passed her husband, kissing his cheek, and sat at the table. In a commanding tone different to how she spoke to Gabriel, but still soft, she asked Alexis to initiate breakfast mode, then softly tapped her head, clicking the tiny unseen metallic circle concealed amongst her golden hair. Gabriel gazed at his wife as her eyes glazed over and the lenses inverted them, all black with a white pupil. He knew she would already be chatting with her friends, probably one of his bubble ideas. Croissants at the top of the Eiffel Tower on its opening day or something. A rubberish tube fell from the ceiling, and like a perfectly poised snake it raised itself, and once lined up with the woman's face it slithered into her mouth. It began pumping the various coloured mixes down her throat. Gabriel's eyes shot to the side in revulsion. He would never tell her, but he didn't eat in the V-net with her because he hated the thought of that tube in his mouth, let alone not having the consciousness to realise it. Finally he relented. Letting his mind move on from the horror of the house molesting his wife's mouth, he thought about his own breakfast. He decided on just a coffee. He lowered his tone and in a deep voice said, "Alexis, coffee preset free, please." As he walked to the counter, the barrel atop it, where he had got his water, made a flurry of various sounds, and he felt the house's unseen movements. As he held an old gemmed goblet to the spouts and turned the top, they now released hot coffee, his harsh morning blend. He drank it in silence, looking away from his wife. Lengiana sprang back to life, her eyes returning to normal, the tube having unconnected many minutes ago. The shock stirring her husband's vacant, emotionless gaze.
"Okay, I'm assuming you're from your lack of disapproval, you approve of my baseware. Now if one may garner one's lenses and tell me what colour and jewellery to wear, we can go."
Gabriel smiled in reflex, finally beginning to return to the present. He looked her up and down, regarding her outfit with more attention. It was new. She was wearing a relatively low-cut dress that clung to her tightly, but flicked out below the waist and stopped halfway down her thighs. He lost himself again. Even now, after all these years, he still looked at his wife like she was art. Especially when she was posing. Sometimes beholding her transported him, usually to his youth. Normally she reminded him of one of the old paintings of a deity upon a seashell he used to stare at and dream upon during Sunday school sermons. Pale but unblemished with summer green eyes contrasting like vibrant paint on a Lucullan canvas. Curvaceous but spread across a taller frame, a drop of grace amongst seduction. It made sense. He wasn't even shocked when she explained her parentage, how she was more than just a genetic optimization. Her father a famous artist and her mother a freelance geneticist, both having far more involvement in the creation of their child than most, designing her inside and out by hand. His disapproval was in way a paradox. Irrespective, at first it was too much of a mindfuck for him to handle, inciting thoughts that maybe his mother was right, and the city was too far from God, a fake paradise filled with unheeded psychopathy. Like much of his mind, he had never told her that this was the reason for their first breakup, but often reminiscence showed him that memory. One of her bamboozled face when she told him and he ran off to throw his stomach at the toilet, again it making its bound in recommendations. He used to think, could people so different in origin be meant to be together? Was anyone supposed to be together? He had softened since then. Lyanna dropped her arms, noticing Gabriel was no longer thinking of her new dress, or even regarding her form lovingly. Miffed for her question and effort to be ignored, she whistled. Her dress became translucent, showing her in full glory. Gabriel's attention returned entirely this time.
"Love it,"
he barked.
"It was going to be a surprise for later," she replied.
Lyanna then crouched between his legs, bringing her head to his crotch seductively, but when she slowly brought her hands up his thighs, she slipped her hand into his pocket, grabbing his lenses holder. Then standing up triumphant, she whistled once more, the dress's opaqueness returning, back to its whitish-grey colour. Gabriel's grin transformed to a grimace, with an upturn on the corners of his lips to show he saw the humour. He had many faces he could wear, and whether they matched his heart or not, he knew few could tell the difference, or even cared, as long as their own masks were attended.
"Okay, old man, you've lost your chance now. I want to get going. It's already nearly 12.
As she said this, she opened the case, took the lenses, and gently put them over her man's eyes. The lenses activated. The extra layer of lights and hologram entities laid itself over reality, and as always thoughts of various parasites wriggled into the mind. He shook them out. Gabriel's preset had a beyond minimal hub. No AI helper with VNet access, no streams, only a tiny grey box in the bottom left of his sight where directed messages could notify him of their existence. He knew his ways confused his wife to no end, but his cultural aloofness was part of his charm. To her and all others, the content had to be heard, of course. At least in here there was no mandatory modes. He looked around to his wife, who was sipping a small water carefully, slowly with both hands. He saw that to him now, her dress was a pale blue, with paler yellow swirls over the bottom half. She also now appeared to have diamonds all over her hands, wrists and ears, all sparkling in unison as she moved. He could also see she had coloured his own clothes and outfitted him in a necklace that had a gemstone cross dangling from it. He ran to grab the real version of this hollow as she laughed. As he ran back to the door, he tied the sentimental trinket onto his wrist. He shot her a look with brow and she rolled her eyes. Its superior shadow disappeared from his neck. They left the house. As they stepped through the oversized door, Gabriel saw the all-too-familiar breathtaking view. Inner city being suspended many hundreds of feet above outer city meant that all the activity, both human and robotic, as well as the travel pods, were all well below them, leaving open clouds and airy horizons all around them, with all the other houses being beauticious and ever-changing, not a single petal with damage or out of place. However, Gabriel was always tacked with a little miff when he alone saw how much of nature was becoming fully digital, more and more so since permalenses were sanctioned by Alexis for them. He walked slower than his wife, running his hand through the flower bush, going through many hologram flower heads before hitting a real one and seeing it shudder from the contact. It was incredible and he rarely liked leaving, but he still preferred the view without lenses no matter how much real nature was being cut away. As long as Alexis didn't touch his favourite tree, everything would be okay. The way Lyanna wanted to do things for once didn't align with Alexis, which meant that they had to use a human hospital and go down to the first ring of outer city. She had already informed the pod of their destination as he reached the entrance. Gabriel took a deep breath and stepped inside. He wasn't claustrophobic, but the way the pod moved through the air was like magic to him. He had Alexis explain it to him so many times, even made a game of trying to remember it all as he was never going to understand it.
"It's mostly windows, for fuck's sake."
His wife saw the puzzle on his face and interjected calmingly.
"I know you're worried, but you say it yourself. It's just the transition your lazy ass hates. Once we've got her, you'll have fun. I know you will. You'll get to—"
His wife interrupted herself, or more aptly, someone else was using Alexis to interrupt her. She began again, but at an excited speed.
Oh, Julie's finally awake. Just give me a sec. It's about tonight.
She clicked her node whilst talking and had already ghosted into the VNet before taking another breath. Gabriel couldn't even remember who Julie was. He went back to his thought. Clearing his throat loudly, knowing few things would now penetrate his wife's zombie-like state, he tried to repeat the pod's mechanisms. To those out of the know, though, science was sorcery. A robotic pre-practiced parody followed. The propulsive systems of the city rely on the epicenter using an electron de-energization to lower atomic mass without influencing atomic structure. The first mechanistic element is vacuum-tube mercury gas, electrically charged by Tesla coils to create a superconductive base. This is the main element enabling directional EMC for coordination. For the special state telemetry, informatics are coordinated by protons in the fiber optic tracks. Gabriel then paused and smiled to himself to think of the rest. This smile, like many, didn't last long. He had a notification. Audio from Alexis. It didn't have a priority order, and he had autoplay turned firmly off. It was tagged, 13 verbal errors and inconsistencies. Would you like to visit the VNet archive? Gabriel had never ghosted, but of everything the VNet can offer, the thought of the archive tempted him most. One of the only times he allowed Alexis to speak back to him was when receiving information, and that would be nothing on the archive. Its visceral nature complementing the knowledge perfectly, or so he imagined. He focused on the presently slowing blurs outside the window. They were now much lower to the ground, still above local traffic, but amongst the city enough to enjoy the abundance of stimuli. A sea of suspended screens scrambling for attention, impossible shapes of all sizes and colours all battling for engagement. Unfortunately, Gabriel knew nearly all had products and bubbles to push. They were now amongst them. The rules were very different here. With this came danger, as well as her cousin excitement, things that used to be a part of his life. Of all things, he missed having vote day, last day of the month. Not just because of having a responsibility, the bulk of it was human novelty, which was fun but usually close to meaningless. He more so really missed how it felt. It felt real. Things may be better in the inner ring, but felt less real. At least here, when you disagreed, you knew it was because of the choice of another human, and not the calculation of a machine, an equation of an amalgamative living code teetering below and then above our comprehensions. What was real entered his mind often. Gabriel removed his lenses to rest both eyes one more time, whilst he could. His hands covered his closed eyelids before being brought together, pushing into his face as if to try and gather and remove something. It helped, even if purely due to the habitual fulfillment, and only for that moment. As he opened them, he saw the real world. Everything wasn't colourful, but the same whitish grey. However, the lack of digital detritus let his mind breathe deeply. The now visible population was shown to be just a fraction of what it appeared, made mostly of programs of all different natures. He also saw various moving metallic transporters which held people. A line of hundreds of pilgrimaging pods. The people inside ghosted. He pressed his face against the glass with its quizzled look. Definitely new and weird, he thought. Gabriel then jumped in shock at the sound of Lengyana behind him.
Ooh, the outside world. Is that a tree?
As he turned around, she had a boxing pose and was throwing fake punches. She continued, but dropping the stance, her eyes started burning with sincerity.
For the final time, are you sure you want this? I know you didn't really want children, and now you only really half want children.
Gabriel could see she was trying to hide a multitude of emotions, and the will to calm her quickly was strong. He spoke. I know I'm not the quickest to speak my mind or open up, but I really do think I'm ready for this. It's where life wants us, and it's what life's really about, right?
Yeah.
Lengyana's reply held a confusion, then less so. Then she looked happy. She continued.
Janet told me about a load more editing options I didn't know about. I know you're pretty much no on everything except general screens, telomere extension, and enhanced immune, right? But what if we just consider a few more things?
The pod speaker spoke over her, a warm voice that had learned to climb out of the uncanny valley many years ago.
We have reached your destination. 3, 2, 1. Doors opening.
The doors did indeed open, and they stepped outside.
"Put your lenses back in,"
Lengyana hissed, though not truly mad. He shuffled along, popping the left one back over his eye, but it was being a little fussy. He hadn't noticed he had veered off path, slightly, to the left. But just like a ship with added distance, the mistake grew. As he looked up, ready to put in the other lens, he found himself past the verge of stopping himself bump into some children standing by the door of the hospital. He made a few wordless sounds, all of which hilarious to his wife, who had now noticed the kerfuffle behind her. Blinking furiously, apologies began flying out of him. The lenses had initiated. Now he could see properly all 3 children were ghosted and unaware that they had been struck by the man. 2 of them had a frame on with a genius design, rings on the upper half of their legs, from which sprouted 2 strips each splitting 2 ways, one up the child's back running along the spine and one to the floor. It facilitated a lean back without exertion. However, the child in the middle, whom wore a yellow jumpsuit with many moving bubbles advertised on it, was struck with enough force to knock him from his weird one-person lean-back seat thing, and now laid on the ground. One of the few things that didn't move on the young master's attire was a large graphic over the chest saying, "Thunder Punch Extreme ZA001, which he dreaded to ponder on. Though he did enjoy how the holographic hat didn't move from his head as he was struck by the accidental fella. Gabriel shot his wife a shocked look as she passed him and lifted the child back up, tipping the legs of his Lena back to the floor. It was as if propping up a doll. All 3 children were wise not to any of this real-world interaction. Gabriel considered how long it would be until his own child was doing things beyond his tastes and understanding, as he and his wife, who were now holding hands, approached the threshold. The giant glass door opened just as she had finished chuckling. Perhaps it would be different because of her. Things changed so quickly and quietly, but probably only jarring when you stepped out of the curve. Gradual is digestible.
"Don't you dare deny the scan, troublemaker, or I'll tell those kids your VID.
Fine, he mumbled back at her. A holographic man appeared before them, directly in their path, bringing them to a halt. He wore white garbs with a red cross upon the right breast, as well as an unusually large headed stethoscope around his neck. He looked very elderly, even much older than Gabriel. He was well shaven and kept, with many wrinkles on what was once a handsome face, white hair thinning but not gone. He looked every bit the perfect doctor to Gabriel. He wanted to ask his wife if she saw the same as him, but he didn't, for many reasons. The doctor began his spiel.
"Eager greetings to you, Mr. and Mrs. Volve. I'm your doctor today. Would you like an FB scan before your appointment?"
The program-wearing a man waited for their response with a smile. He would wait forever if asked, and probably never drop the smile. Lengyana nodded to accompany her intonation.
"I must receive consent from you too,"
the doctor demanded, firm but still friendly, his eyes on Gabriel, whom looked at the ground. He faced up to see both parties assessing him before mumbling, "Yeah, that's fine, Shiz." The doctor closed his eyes and lowered his head as if accepting sovereign approval, before vanishing from sight and reappearing at the end of the long corridor. Lengyana let out a short chuckle at the inappropriate manners and began walking towards him, Gabriel her heel. Gabriel looked at the ceiling. It was covered in shiny lens-like discs. They shuddered and the room filled with high and dull-pitched noises. A buzz he knew was the rustling of the hive before the invasion. The Vanta-black corridor began luminously lashing from every direction, the numerous coloured lasers hitting the man shooting over and around him. It was a discomforting amount of motion and intensity for the uninitiated eye, let alone a man as antithetical to the future as Gabriel. As they walked, memories imposed themselves over him. The last time he was in a hospital, the only other time, it wasn't as nice as this hospital, but still enough to blow his mind. Well, the mind he used to have. An older, younger version of himself. A stranger, a fool, and a man he quite fondly missed being. Past withstanding, the man of that time, the past Gabriel, was not happy with himself or his world. He, after much helpful ridicule and crushed naiveties, found his first and only desire fulfilled by the city come the end of his first day. He arrived with a patchy head of frizzy fuzz, and the knowledge from his brother's letter that it was true the city could give him back his hair. His wife laughs at the story, only meeting him after his thick sandy mane was returned.
The mentation lurched to the sheer entertainment the novelty of himself was in the eyes of the doctor. A comedy and an intrigue. He remembered when he squealed after his eyes thirstily gulped in at his blood results. The first unaltered human he had ever physically seen. Whilst at the time he couldn't convince the wide-eyed Gabriel to replenish his youth, skin, cartilage, teeth, etc., he did use the well-versed weapon of the city, ridicule, to get him out of the dark ages of aging, and have his aging paused by way of genetic manipulation. He explained it in layman terms, but the words still made no sense, and when he left the hospital he went to find out what he had done to himself. He had learned to see the lines and flaws on his face as part of him. He had to keep his visage even if it was a decade older than almost all others. He would, however, forego the perils of furthering the fragility of the body and extend his dance with death. Being ancient looked shit anyway, and his mother's passing seemed senseless. His senescence was paused by adding telomerase, extending the capping of the chromosomes, so during mitosis the split cells truly were identical to the parent cell. This, with a few genes being inactivated, meant the body never had a deficit of resource, and in turn no need to prioritize and lessen the rejuvenation of the body's temperamental systems. Gabriel pondered on this baby-faced doctor, and his words echoed deeper in his mind. When he found out the man was almost twice his age, he knew he couldn't resist the offer. He pondered on the deeper understanding he now had, put this new scope to the situation. The city had changed him, more than time and epiphany alone on the outside ever could. Old Babyface's mug lighting up at getting to use the Godmaker protocol on the splicing machine forever meant something new in his mind. What do you even call a being that can remove mortality? Gabriel! His wife clicked in quick repetition to accompany the hiss. He snapped back to reality and back to trouble apparently. He had multitasked, somewhat. They had completed the scan, fantastical and useful light show blah-de-blah. They were talking. He's changed his face and form, or it's a different program, probably her request, and now she's pissed off. His thoughts turned to words. I consent to all, he droned with lackluster. The new doctor started to speak before being interrupted by Lenyana.
It's a real person, you doofus. AI isn't allowed to sanction birth. And turn around, I would have...
All were then directed by the doctor's cough as he took the attention once more. Whilst it settled back on him comfortably, Gabriel quickly flicked his head around to see two floating screens. Only there digitally, and more so looking like windows. He usually liked to think of them as tears in reality, but the embarrassment of the moment made him hate the tech right now. Through one video window was Lenyana's parents, sitting on a beach. The other peered into the heart of a stranger's home. A cat-like looking woman stared back at him with disdain. That must be her friend Jules or whatever. His organs were lurching as now in front of the in-laws and wife's friend he appeared to be stupid and worse, uncaring in such a serious time. He just couldn't help it. Not that it matters to them. He's her pet anyway. Don't worry, I'm rather boring at the best of times, and this obligatory Leleptuan before the fun anyway. The poor man shouldn't be chastised for being human. I don't want me to continue the spiel, alas I must. As I was saying, your scans show nothing problematic and are now available for you. You must also be reminded we are about to enter a Vex-regulated and secure area of the hospital, so you must stay close for obvious reasons. If you'll now follow me to the baby wing, we'll get going. It may take a while, but will definitely be worth it. Dr. Ossinik looked away from Gabriel, tilted his head as he smiled at both Lenyana and over her shoulder to the virtual group. The doctor led and the Volves followed, with the video windows following them, but raised higher in the air whilst travelling as to not affect the clarity of the environment. It wouldn't affect others, they wouldn't see them, but it's very cumbersome to the viewer to be interacting with the environment, with the screens of the in-laws flying through other people. The doctor turned his head to scout the party, and Lenyana took the opportunity to speed up and walk alongside him, easing the facilitation of our offer of closed conversation. Gabriel made sure he didn't retreat too deeply this time. He had to stay guarded and keep his kind eyes and attentive ears at the ready. As he walked, he looked around the busy hospital. Not really busy, but it was to him. He saw a handful of people either having machines attached to them by spec-specific robots, or appearing to talk to themselves whilst moving in and out of closed rooms,
all with their own doctors, windows, holoreps and streams and more, he was sure. Some people were waiting and he passed them. Of the few stationary patrons, 2 were young children sat next to each other, cross-legged on the floor, around 5 years old and already ghosting. They were probably waiting for their parents who left them unsupervised, as they knew they wouldn't move. Couldn't move. But did they know they were ghosted? Did they think whatever bubble they were in was their real reality? Did the parents decide how long they ghost for and don't release them? Gabriel did not know how to feel. One man passed him without a robot accompanier, and wasn't yammering away, instead a seriously intense expression on his sweaty face. He stood out though. Well, to Gabriel. Nobody else seemed to notice him. Even those not ghosting he knew would be having their worlds populated with their favoured content, eyes flickering, struggling to keep up with so many of their oh-so-unique activities. To not notice this one odd-acting man amongst the digital dog shit clouding their vision is believable. In inner city, everyone would be tracked by Alexis ran smart cameras assessing their behaviour. Here, the security cameras are probably sat without watchers. His brother always speaks well of the Vex, but human control causes human error. His wonder could not stop him and his feet slowed, his head and neck extending to keep watching the man who had now turned off and was walking down an adjacent corridor. The man was dragging his leg, but only slightly. There was a small black sphere connected to his left shoe, a metallic green sheen to it and slimy looking. It trailed him. Was he another real human? Like a doctor, trialing some new mind-boggling tech too heavy to carry? Why not use a robot? His thoughts didn't matter. Lenyana and Dr. Ossinik had reached destination. Split doors with a moving red and yellow hollow barrier surrounding them in a semicircle. The colours of the background moving, but not the large black words saying, planning and birthing, Vex protected. They had noticed his childlike dilly-dallying, and were waiting for him. One patient, the other frustrated. Neither emotion was enough to speed his pace. He dawdled, finishing his thoughts. It's not that he was defiant. He was indeed quite a placid man. It just made little difference to him who and what was angry with him at any given moment. He didn't choose a lot, but he chose his own pace. As he passed the holographic warning barrier, covering the door, red engulfed his entire vision, a superimposition over the eyes. It wasn't a digital shape in the room, but right in front of his face like a blindfold. It was total darkness, and the red box was all he saw. He knew he was ghosting. Even if only technically, even if it's not in the VNet, was he hypothetically out of base reality? He was inverted and already felt out of control. His breathing increased. Not yet frantic, but he was panicking. He heard his wife's voice.
Honey, please, this is the security check I told you about. Just read it and accept it and you can have your precious control back.
Into Chapter A. Bubble VX99. Jim's Safe Space. I was once jealous of a man I read about. Nothing impressive, just really sitting on a boat in a river. In the sunshine and then in the shade, going through a box of cigarettes. Okay, so what do you think? Should I finish it? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback and comment might make more of a difference than you realise. Do you think any of the elements I've touched on could be in our future? Anyway, thanks again and I'll catch you in the next video. Oh, and subscribe. Definitely subscribe, please.